By 1954, a moral panic had gripped America. The United States Senate convened a subcommittee to discuss what to do about comic books, which many senators considered to be dangerous and in need of censorship.
Senator Kefauver, what have you learned so far in your investigation on the subject of comic books?
Paul, we had an extensive hearing in New York some months back, and we've had other hearings in other parts of the country. I was amazed to find the number of comic books being published each month in the United States.
Well, what about the effect of these comic books on the children?
All of our testimony from psychiatrists and children themselves show that it's very upsetting, that it has a bad moral effect, and that it is directly responsible for a substantial amount of juvenile delinquency and child crime.
Are there presently comic books in publication that you feel are harmful to children?
Yes, there are still some, although not as many as there used to be. The industry, you know, has appointed a czar. They have a code. Mr. Murphy is in charge of the code operation. They submit their comic books to him, and he passes on them. They are now not supposed to show crime and horror in their comics.
It is my opinion, without any reasonable doubt and without any reservation, that comic books are an important contributing factor in many cases of juvenile delinquency.
As a survival mechanism, as a way to save themselves, the comics industry, comics publishers united and formed an organization in 1954 called the Comics Magazine Association of America.
41 codes strictly oversaw each comic approved by the Comics Code Authority, which was instituted by the Comics Magazine Association of America. Genres like crime and horror were practically erased. A few of the codes are as follows. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority. No magazine shall use the word horror or terror in its title. Profanity, obscenity, smut, vulgarity, or words or symbols which have acquired undesirable meanings are forbidden. And just for good measure, Part C of the Code's general standards stated sweepingly, all elements or techniques not specifically mentioned herein, but which are contrary to the spirit and intent of the Code, and are considered violations of good taste or decency, shall be prohibited.
The effect on the industry, the economic effect on the industry, was devastating. More than 800 writers and artists lost their jobs as a result of the impact on the comic book industry. And between 1953 and 1955, the number of comic book titles plummeted by about 40%. 1955 was the first year since comic books were introduced that the number of publishers, there were no new publishers of comics beginning in 1955. And so for that period, through about the mid-1960s, you had a severe depression in the industry. It drove some people out of the business entirely. One of the primary targets of Wordham and was a witness at the Kefauver hearings was William Gaines, who was the publisher of EC Comics, had a number of crime and horror titles and so on. And he was devastated at the hearings. They would use covers of his comic books and then force them to try and defend them. And it was a debacle that led the industry to try and pull back and that led to the adoption of the code. But Gaines went out of the business entirely and instead created Mad Magazine and became a cultural influence in a different way.
What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of our own children? Do we forget that they are citizens too and entitled to the essential freedom to read? Or do we think our children so evil, so vicious, so simple-minded, that it takes but a comic magazine story of murder to set them to murder, of robbery to set them to robbery?
If you're interested in this topic and want to learn more about how comics eventually defeated the code, listen to So to Speak, the Free Speech Podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.